Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for spending time with us, whether you just arrived or if you've been here for most of the day. We're incredibly grateful. As I'm sure you know by now, there's some food, water, snacks in the back of the space. Please do make sure to keep yourselves hydrated, caffeinated, and fed. My name is Lily Philpott, and along with Dean Liang Ko, I'm the co-director of this 6th Biennial Singapore Literature Festival. This is our last panel of the day before our closing event, and this is going to be a really special one, so thank you all again for being here. Before we begin, I want to make sure to thank the Asian American Writers Workshop for generously donating their space to us to use today. This is an incredibly special place, really the core of Asian American literary culture in New York City, and we were saying earlier, the East Coast. This library is incredibly vast. A lot of these books are first editions. I was pointing out there are zines over there, there are lit magazines. There is the Nina Alexander reading room in the back. In the breaks between panels, please do take a moment to just appreciate the wealth of knowledge and culture that is gathered here. I want to thank in particular Mohammed Saleh, who's not here right now, but in absentia, Mohammed Saleh is the program manager at AAWW, and he is awesome. Our final panel of the day is titled Adapting Classics for the Stage. It will bring together a fascinating and multidisciplinary group of art makers, Ong Keng Sen, Martínez, Damon Chua, and our moderator, Zizi Majid. I'm going to give Zizi's bio really quickly, and then she will introduce the speakers. Zizi Majid is a playwright whose plays advocate for a shared humanity. She is the inaugural recipient of the Julia Miles Playwriting Residency, a recent alumni of the Dramatists Guild's Foundation Playwriting Fellowship, and a proud alumni of the WP Lab. She won the Pacific Rim Prize for Playwriting, was a finalist for the Blue Ink Playwriting Award, a twice semi-finalist for the O'Neill National Playwrights Conference, and a finalist for the Columbia at Roundabout New Play Reading Series. Welcome.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for being here. I'm so excited to be moderating this final panel of this great weekend that we've had of the Singapore Literature Festival. Thanks so much, Ji Liang, for this wonderful festival. So I'm really excited because I'm going to be moderating this panel, Adapting Classics for the Stage, with artists who I greatly admire, who I'm in awe of. So we have our theatre director, Ong Keng Sen from Singapore. We have amazing theatre director, Martínez, whose amazing new play I just watched last night. Go catch it. It's called Dirty Laundry. And poet, playwright, writer, and producer, Damon Chua. So I'd like to start off by inviting each of our panelists to share a little bit about their work. Growing up as a young artist in Singapore, Keng Sen was the artist that I looked up to. He is a visionary auteur whose intercultural work set the bar for how we decolonize through the theatre. His Lear is still one of the best productions I have seen in my life. And so I'm very honored to have him here today. He is the artistic director of what was formerly known as Theatre Works, now T Works. He is the founding festival director of the Singapore International Festival of the Arts, and he initiated the Young Curators Academy in Berlin. His production of Trojan Women was in the BAM New Wave Festival, and he was the artistic director of the Prince Claus Fund's digital 25-hour festival to commemorate cultural innovation in the global south. And today he will be speaking about his amazing new film, Becoming Salome. Thanks, Amy.
Zizi, and thank you very much, G and Lily, for having me here, and everyone who's helping with Singapore Unbound. It's really a beautiful time in the sense that I see what we call in Singapore gotong royong, which is the spirit of coming together and sharing whatever we have. And it's a very special time, I think, whenever you have a festival, because it means that we transcend certain borders, and during that time there is a coming together of sharing. And I want to just kind of go to the slides because we have quite a short time. And the topic today is adapting the classics, and in particular I want to talk about this particular production which is based on Salome, Oscar Wilde's Salome, and in a sense is a little bit about queering classics, and the question of what, of course, is queering, and in this particular production, it didn't start out that way, but in the end, because of the extreme diaries or archives of Michaela Daoud, whom I met, it became a production about their archives or their unhappy diaries. And in a way, this is to quote from Sarah Ahmed's The Promise of Happiness. Sarah Ahmed talks about why we have to be unhappy, why we have to continue to remember unhappiness, and why we have to be affect aliens, meaning that we are the ones who kill joy. We kill joy because we remind the rest about the unhappiness or the melancholy of migration, or the unhappiness of being queer, or being a feminist killjoy. These are the three tropes that she has in her book. This idea that you can be one of those who sits at the dinner table and you destroy the conversation because of the fact that you are unhappy, or that you are an affects alien. So I think that this sense of let me talk a little bit about how this scene came about, or this show came about. Maybe the next slide, Lily, please. Thank you. So this is the production, which is actually a kind of a film which is broadcast or telecast, screened in the theatre, and there is a live performance, music performance by Kathy Matthews, who in a sense is also a kind of Salome, because she's the live. Is there? Thank you. She's the live performer, and she's responding musically to the whole film. And there are two sources of films. One is the film that we made in Berlin, and that's with Michaela. So you can see it here. And because the theatre is so intimate, you can see that it fills the entire kind of proscenium arch. And on this side where the TV is, that's the edge of the proscenium arch. And this is the audience balcony. And Kathy is seated in kind of like halfway up the theatre, and this photograph was taken from the back of the theatre. Lily, can I have the next slide? And you can see like it's a very intimate space. It's the New Victoria Theatre in Singapore, and this was the only time that we played it. Even though the film has its own existence, it's a 75-minute film, but we have not screened it separately, actually. So the production consists of two elements. One is a kind of a live film, which is with the script of Oscar Wilde, and the actress is actually behind the screen. And there is in the course of the event, there are kind of interweaving moments of cinema and performance. And her performance behind is also a camera, so it's like live cinema, and the live cinema is interwoven with this filmed reality that we had from Berlin, in my apartment in Berlin. So next slide. So that's Michaela and myself. I mean, I appear in it more as a kind of as an intervening person and kind of mediating the making of the film. And in a sense, I'm approaching it more like a documentary maker in relation to Michaela's life. Yeah, next slide, please. That's just an image of some of the different. All these photographs were actually photographs that Michaela had taken as a man before Michaela became acknowledged themselves to be non-binary. So Michaela had was a cis gay male, and at the time they were called, well, Michael or Michael is not really also their name, because they are Syrian refugee, asylum seeker, and for the last 9 years they have been living in Germany, but they have not gotten their passports yet. So we don't really know, well, I know of course, but the official name is Michaela, and that's not the real passport name, right? So Michaela has this, before they actually came into the work, has this whole archive of photographs taken in a photo studio of themselves as a cis male and in different states of dress and undress, and this becomes a scene in the film as a kind of an ode to their past identity. And actually, everything was kind of reflecting their own process over the 9 years and this unhappiness archive. And I think that what is interesting to say is that actually, when we first started, I was not thinking of making this work, in the sense that I had invited an Iranian dancer to be Salome, and it was a kind of a paradigm during pandemic of trying to explore how we can continue to make live theatre, right? Where in a way, the liveness was completely compromised by the pandemic. So the question of what remains of the theatre, and the idea was that we would make the classic, film the classic in a home. So and actually I've continued with this experiment. I've just done Dido and Aeneas in an Italian home, and that film will be released actually as a film first, and that's going to be released on 1st December at the Singapore Film Festival. So this idea of filming a classic in a home, I mean, it's of course not new. There were many different, I remember, like, I think Cherry Orchard, maybe Three Sisters, I can't remember, but mostly these Chekhovian plays because they are indoor situations. And the question of this work was that I had begun with this Iranian dancer, but the Iranian dancer wanted to perform on stage, which we could not guarantee because there was a bit of uncertainty in 2022 still. It was a bit uncertain whether we would become actually live or a film. So because I couldn't guarantee the situation, I said that, okay, let's, maybe we should part company and come back together next time for another project. And I put a call out to have a new Salome. And at that time, it was not a public call, but it was a call between friends. And Michaela was recommended. Michaela was trained as an architect in Damascus, but had, because of the seeking asylum and leaving, and basically they walked into Europe from Greece over 3 months into, crossing the border into Hungary itself. But this was all through walking in winter, and it was a very treacherous journey because they tried 14 times at the Athens airport to actually travel into the former West, into Europe itself. But every time they were discovered, and so they were pushed back. And so finally, the decision was to walk across these mountains in over 3 months, and it was at the heart of winter because at that time, the border police would be less vigilant, right? Because there's a lot of snow, etc., etc. So, so when I met Michaela, I was still thinking that, okay, we're going to do Salome, and then when I met them and we talked more, and I said, oh gosh, this is not really, perhaps it's not suitable to think about doing Salome because we have to discover the agency of the performer, right? Because that's the whole question that we are involved in. Decoloniality or decolonization involves discovering the other's power or the other's agency, because only when they have that agency can they decolonize the context that they're in. And so of course, it then became a kind of process where we were reading Salome together, and I had 2 rehearsal processes. I had the Singapore rehearsal process, which was on Zoom, and then I had this process with Michaela where it was over a week, and over the week, of course, when you work with someone who is bringing in their experience, you start to go deeper and deeper into their lives and into the entire diary and the archives, and then finally you realize, okay, actually they are Salome, and that's why the film is entitled Becoming Salome, but should it be about performing the lines of the play? And of course, we did not perform any line from the play, and it became kind of following following the strategy, the most interesting thing that we found out was that during pandemic, very often Michaela dressed up in drag in the apartment and lived as the alter ego, as their alter ego called Bobola. So Bobola is fashioned after their mother, and is always in a turban, and always in lots of glitter, and lots of fantasy. And it was fascinating because the actual idea that I had was that how would we fantasize being some character in the house during the pandemic as you are actually locked down? So how do you actually find another reality during the lockdown? And it was interesting because Michaela came up with this story which was directly about that instance, about how they would, during the lockdown, dress up, and sometimes there would be a preparation ritual of making pancakes and a kind of entire like ritual bath before they actually then become Bobola. And when they become Bobola, because of the lockdown, they are taunting people. They're taunting like heterosexual men on the streets and encouraging them to come up. But of course they can't come up because at that time there was a curfew, there was a lockdown in Berlin. And so it was a kind of a way of living a dream life, but at the same time also confronting the barrier or the boundary being an asylum seeker, right? But taunting the German men who were downstairs on the road and Bobolas on the balcony, like a Rapunzel, right? So so it was a kind of complete, I would say, bastardization of the whole notion of their contexts where they were actually trying to be German, trying to become a German citizen, right? So the whole question of what is integration and the unhappiness of having to integrate and also to lose your memory and to lose your and to kind of forget where you come from. So maybe the next slide, Lily, please. Okay, so yeah, so this is a crucial scene in the film where Bobola talks about leaving Turkey, because the storytelling begins from Turkey, where to migrate or to illegally smuggle themselves into the EU, they had to get a series of smugglers, and this cost about 10,000 euros. And Bobola had to, or Michaela had to, be a sex worker for I think about 2 years to raise 10,000 euros to then cross. And so the whole question of how he had to work and how and in a way he ended up with kind of a phobia of their own genitals, and went through a whole period of phallophobia and depression once they got into Germany. And the scene in the bathroom, which is a crucial scene, where it's almost like I very often work with the notion of video essays. So what's happening on the film is not really spoken, but it's typed into subtitles, a kind of a video essay. And like in this scene, for example, the entire journey that they go through to get into Hungary and the different smugglers they had to go through was actually just through text and through this kind of like a video essay image as they are going through the old photographs. Maybe another slide? Yeah, another one please, Lily. Yeah, so it's just getting deeper into the psyche. And I think that what was interesting for me was that the fact that as they told the story, they became more and more empowered, and actually through I met them in 2021, and I'm still in contact with them, of course, and I invited them to be in the second film where they were working with costumes, and and now they've gone on to enroll themselves into a master's program in performance, because what happened was that his architecture degree was worthless because their architecture degree was worthless because they were about to finish and they had to escape from Syria, so with no papers. And so when I met them, they were actually not in the university. And so through the process of making the work, they became so empowered that they registered and they went into first the bachelor course, for a couple of months, and then finally they transferred into the master's course. So I like to see it as a process of making this work was also a process of them discovering their own agency for their own life, or their lives, and this idea that perhaps it's, again, as we talked about yesterday in the keynote, it's not about theatre, but it's about life in a way. Maybe another slide, please. Yeah, and this is the last scene, right? Because the reason why, in a way, Salome, it was ideal as a kind of portal through which we went through, is that just as Salome was resisting the patriarchy of Herod and even John the Baptist, what's a more queer idea than a person demanding for the head of a man, right? And that this head is delivered on a silver platter, right? Which is the scenario of the Oscar Wilde Salome. So it's a very queer moment, and the fact that at the moment that she receives the head at the end, the ultimate scene, Salome starts to speak in a way which she confesses her love to this head, and you get a sense that it's a love-hate relationship with this head, or the emblem or the symbol of patriarchy, right? And the patriarchy she was resisting not only Herod but also John the Baptist, who saw her as pagan, satanic, etc., etc. So the idea of religion and gender and race and sexuality, and that possibly, because the whole idea that we had was like, what was she going to do with this head? Was she going to bring the head with her to the bedroom? Was she just leaving the head there and walking out? What exactly? And of course, actually, she was killed by the soldiers, right? That's the last scene, which is not explained, but it's just a kind of image. It's a last visual image. But what would she have done if she was alive? Would she have walked off with this head into the night, into the street? And how would she have carried the head on this silver platter, just in the bag or whatever? Imagining that if this was happening in New York City and in an apartment, how would she be moving with this head? Or would she just have dropped the head on, in the lift lobby? So this whole thing was really very central to us. Like how queer can this story actually be? Because it was the narrative of this of the original biblical story, and it's interesting because actually in the biblical story we are not sure how old Salome really is, and there are some records that talk about her maybe being only about 12 years old as a young girl, right? And so the last scene where is voguing, and again from the life of Michaela, going into the voguing party, and at this moment, Michaela or Bobola beheads themselves or beheads herself, right? So the drag queen's head falls off, and the last scene is them accepting their non-binary sexuality, right? So there's a kind of a way in which the patriarchy is their own head, right? So they behead themselves, and it's of course symbolic that beheading themselves is not just the head of a man, but the head of a drag queen who's been forced to live as a woman in a man's world, right? And so in this non-binary situation, and the last scene, I don't have an image of the last scene, but maybe Lily, please move it forward. And these are all and in the film, on stage, in the film itself, there isn't all this text that's emblazoned. All this text is coming from Oscar Wilde's John the Baptist, right? And it's all extremely racist, sexist, hatred speech, right? That it's directed towards women and directed towards, in that case, Salome, whom John the Baptist saw as the spawn of Satan, right? So it's a lot of racist text, not racist, but sexist text that's being put out there. And of course, it was a very complex situation because at that time, Salome is quite anti-Semitic, the text itself, because it's happening in that part of the world. But Salome and Herod, etc., were part of the Roman Empire, but they were converts from the land to become Romans. Yeah, so it's a complex kind of racist, religious, as well as sexist text. So okay, let's move on. Maybe there's another last slide, but Lily, please. Yeah. So this is the last scene where we come to the actual body of Michaela, and Michaela actually has tattooed a particular text on their body, which I was very attracted to when I saw that it was really an entire text of their lives. And at the last moment, this Michaela then carries the head of Bobola, the drag queen persona that they had occupied during the whole pandemic period. And the text on the body is actually a 3rd or 4th century Coptic text. And it goes, for I am the first and the last, I'm the venerated and the despised, I'm the prostitute and the saint, I'm the wife and the virgin, I'm the mother and the daughter, I'm the arms of my mother, I'm barren and my children are many, I'm the married woman and the spinster, I'm the woman who gives birth and she who never procreated, I'm the consolation for the pain of birth, I'm the wife and the husband, and it was my man who created me. I'm the mother of my father, I'm the sister of my husband, and he is my rejected son. Always respect me, for I am the shameful and the magnificent one. So all this is actually on the entire back, all the way down to, past the bum, down to the legs, I think. Yeah. Okay, so that's it. Thank you very much.
Sharing that text. It's beautiful. I'd now like to invite Rebecca Martínez. Rebecca is a multidisciplinary theater director. She is currently the cohort collaborations director at One Nation, One Project. Her recent work include Bite Me and San Jojo at WP Theatre. She was in the Lincoln Center Theatre Directors Lab and the Drama League Directing Fellow. Awards she has won include the Colorado Award for Directing, 4 Grammy Awards from Portland, and the Lila Jewell Award for Women Artists. And today she's going to speak about her work co-adapting and directing the bilingual musical production of The Comedy of Errors for the Public Theatre's mobile unit. Rebecca.
Thank you so much. It's such an honor to be here with this tremendous group of just makers, so thank you so much. Just to talk a little bit about sort of like, not like here's my whole story, but a little bit of where some of the ideas for this production came from is I used to be an actor back in the day, and one of the first things that I did as an actor was I performed in a touring educational program, and it was shows in both English and Spanish that were health education shows. And we toured in like health centers and community centers and farm worker camps and like lots of different places. So one of the things that I started just initially with theater was the thought of like bringing theater to community as opposed to asking the community to come to theater. And so that was something that was very interesting to me from a very early time in my theater career. And so that was in Portland, Oregon, where I started that. And then when I came to New York City, one of the things that I was invited to do, I've been here since like 2011, I got a seed commission, which was just a directing commission from Stephanie Ibarra, who was the director of the mobile unit at Public Theater. And it was the first commission that was given to a director there, but it was basically follow the mobile unit around and see what they do. And the mobile unit is a fantastic initiative that brings theater into communities. And one of the languages, because it is the New York Shakespeare Festival, is what the public's official name is and how it got started. One of the ways that they were doing this was with Shakespeare. And Shakespeare specifically is something that, for me, I didn't feel any connection to. And I had no no background in. And I was like, what is this? Shakespeare is not for me. People like me are not in Shakespeare. The language is funny. I don't know how to say it. I don't know what's going on. So I never had anything to do with Shakespeare. But one of the things that I did do was I followed a production of Midsummer Night's Dream around and saw it in like a larger community center and a smaller community center and in a shelter where women were staying in a very small audience. So I saw it in the smallest of audiences and larger audiences. And I saw the proximity of performer to audience member and the connection that they were building. And I interviewed some of the actors from that tour as well. And one of the things that they said, just because I was like, okay, if I'm gonna do something like this, and I'm gonna do Shakespeare, and I don't know anything about Shakespeare, then somebody give me some sort of like anchors that I can find my way in. And so one of the things that folks very specifically talked about was joy, humor, family reunions, families being reunited. And I thought those three things, and I thought, yes, those are three things I can very deeply connect to because those are universal. I understand this. And then the pandemic hit and it went nowhere. That commission went nowhere. But years later, I got the invitation to come back and direct one of the mobile units. And when they were like, okay, what are you gonna do? I said, well, you did this one, this one, this one, this one. What about the Comedy of Errors? And because they haven't done it, is one that isn't done very often. It's all kinds of problematic. It's not a very well written play. It was one of the early ones. And so the meter is all off. It's just kind of a wild thing. But they were like, okay, we haven't done that. And at the heart, the reason why the Comedy of Errors spoke to me was because it's a comedy, but number two, it is, for folks who maybe aren't aware with the story, that's the word I'm trying to think of, it's actually about family separation. And a family that is separated because of illegal or just arbitrary laws that a country has put into place that has separated these twins, this family, and so when it's very convoluted, so I won't do the whole thing. But when the father is looking for his lost children, his lost child, he comes to Ephesus from Syracuse, and he is condemned to die because he is illegal in that country. And one of the things that I knew was going to be happening with this tour is it would be touring throughout New York City, and it would be touring to communities where this is a story that is held by many of the communities of having to live a distance from their family, of having to raise a family that they don't ever get to see because they have to stay in this country and work. And of the idea of being disconnected, but of still trying to maintain familial bonds. And doing that in a comedy. So for me, it was like, this is something that I can latch onto. Also, it needs to have some Spanish, and also it needs to have some music. So those were some of the things that I was thinking about particularly. I knew it was gonna be an outdoor tour because it's post-COVID. So one of the things that I thought about immediately is street theater, particularly street theater in Latin America. I needed to draw people to the show. So I was like, okay, bright colors. We have to compete with New York City. We have to compete with the streets of New York City. So let's put everyone in the brightest colors we can. Let's get some music. Let's have some songs that sort of like catch us up. There's some of that. And that let us know what's going on in English and Spanish. And that give us, we're gonna play that video in just a second, and that give us just a sense of, hey, what is happening over there? That looks kind of interesting, let me come and see. Of drawing people to the show so that they can come and enjoy it. And even if they're there for 5 minutes or they stay for the whole thing, the whole part of it was like, let's bring people together, let's create a community of joy, and let's give a story in both English and Spanish using this text, Shakespeare's text, to give us a sense of what might, something that might be reflective in their life. So what we're seeing are just some images. This was at Astor Place by the public, which is an extremely busy intersection. And we did the show first initially in the summer of 2023, and we did it this last summer. They brought it back for a larger tour. We had like 700 to 800 people at Astor Place. The shows, we had seats for about less than 300, about 280, and every single show that we had anywhere from like 700, 800, 1,000. Our biggest show was like 1,500 people in Sunset Park. And it was the thing that stood out to me was what happens when we bring theater to a community and create the type of work that asks them, we want to invite you into the event. And we want to make it accessible in all kinds of ways so that you feel like you're part of this community. Maybe we can go back and just watch the video so you can get a little sense of what it is. Yeah, so that's just one little song that we did, and I co-adapted this with the brilliant Julian Mesri, who is a playwright, also he writes musicals, he's a composer, he is very fluent in both English and Spanish, so we worked together on the lyrics and he put them in Spanish. That was and when we were writing the music, we really wanted to take Shakespeare's story. There's a lot of problematic stuff in the Comedy Bears. So we were able to work with Shakespeare scholars, and I was basically like, okay, there's a lot of slave and master in this story, take it out. That is not something we're gonna bring out to the community. That is not something we're gonna invite in. Well, we're gonna take out things there's some really gross speech about women in the story, and I'm gonna just like, leave it out. I don't want it, I'm not interested in it. And we use songs as a way to rewrite different, basically it started with, I didn't like this storyline, can we rewrite it to give us a different perspective? Like the character of Luciana, there's two sisters that are basically like, this is how men are, men do this, and we just have to go along with it because, you know, men play around in the street and we have to stay home. And I'm like, okay, someone can think about that. Yes, someone can hold that because that is very truthful, but let's put a counterpoint to that idea and let's talk about what it is. And I think the other thing that just wanted to say was people would also talk about like this was the saddest version of the Comedy Bears that they'd ever seen. Which I was like, okay, I don't know what that means. But the thing that felt really important to me is that when we had the family reunion, spoiler alert, the family's reunited, but the family is finally reunited after being away from each other for decades, is that we slowed it down and we allowed it to be complex and we allowed it to have that, like, what is it going to do? Like, what is it actually like when you have to rebuild a relationship with someone in your family that you haven't seen for decades? And that was something that was very important to us, as well as bringing lots of joy. So just a little bit about our show. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. I would now like to invite Damon Chua, who is the recipient of the Ovation Award for his play, Film Chinois. He is an alumnus of the Public Theatre's Emerging Writers Group, as well as Mining Theatre Company's Writers Lab. He's a published author, and today he will speak about his wonderful play, Warrior Sisters of Wu, that is, takes its inspiration from the Romance of the Three Kingdoms.
Thank you, Zizi, and thank you, G and Lily, and for this wonderful festival. There are some slides okay. So this is not exactly a Warrior Sisters of Wu. I'm gonna have a quick introduction about this other play. I'm gonna spend very little time on this other play because I'm gonna focus more on the other one. This is The Empress Nightingale, and it's an adaptation of Hans Christian Andersen's The Nightingale, but it is set in Qing dynasty in China. And so we can scroll through some of the slides. They're pandas, that's the emperor. Next slide, and that's the nightingale, but that's the mechanical nightingale, which replaces the real nightingale. Next slide, that's the nightingale in real life. Next slide, yeah, and then there's a finale, etc. Next slide. Yes, so this is not in chronological order. I just want to give you some flavor of that. Next slide. Yep. So this, just to let you know, because it's a TYA play, theater for young audiences. So that's why there are pandas, there's the lion, there are puppets, there's poetry, there's dancing. One thing you should know that in terms of what I do, I'm fearless. I put everything into a play, and not knowing whether it will ever be produced, because who knows whether people can find puppeteers or people to be in costume, or people who can speak poetry in 17 syllables exactly, but that's what I do. Next slide. Okay, so Warrior Sisters of Wu. That is an adaptation of Romance of the Three Kingdoms. That's a Chinese classics, and that's a commission from Pan Asian Rep, and it premiered off-Broadway earlier this year. So during the pandemic, 2021, right when nothing was happening, right when I was sitting at home doing absolutely nothing, Pan Asian came to me and said, "Do you want to adapt Romance of the Three Kingdoms?" And of course, would I say no? I mean, I had nothing to do. I was holed up at home. So of course I said yes, without really knowing what I was getting into. I mean, of course I know the classic, I know some of the storylines, but I don't know how much it was. So just to give you a little bit of a background, Romance of the Three Kingdoms is about 800,000 words in length. That's about the length of about maybe 10 different books. It has 100 chapters. It has over 1,000 characters. All right. So how do you adapt that into a play? I had absolutely no idea. Next slide. So I did a lot of research. I had so much time. I was at home for like 6 months. Literally didn't walk out of my building for like 6 months. I had food delivered, whatever. So I landed on these two characters, the Warrior Sisters of Wu. So Romance of the Three Kingdoms is about these three countries at the end of Han Dynasty that was like jostling for position. So Wu is a country in the south, and it's a small country, but it was battling against a bigger country in the north, the Wei country. And Wei, if you think about it, it's like the evil empire, and Wu is the rebels, okay? So they're smaller, they are less equipped, they are not so strong in terms of military power. So these two women, in the actual stories, they were warriors who were married to two generals, and they went off to war. That's it. That's all there is in the original classic. But then as I did research, I find a lot of references to these two women. Well, that's because since that classic was published, they've appeared in many forms. One, they were in an opera, a Peking opera, where they were the leads, they were warriors, they won the war. And then subsequent to that, in the late 20th century, some video game designer in Japan decided that there should be warrior sisters in a video game. That was very successful. It spawned like a whole series of video games. In fact, I found out that at least 2 million people have played the video games in which these two women were characters in. So I'm quite sure at this very moment, someone is playing them on a video game. So I really wanted to create these characters and put them into a story. So essentially the story is one of two women getting married to two generals going to war. And so how do you tell that story? Because there's very little to go on in the classic, very little to go on elsewhere. So I wrote this draft, because I was spending stuck at home all the time. And after 6 months, I thought I had something. No, actually it's longer than that, because the first 6 months was all research. After another 6 months, I kind of finished a draft, a very bad draft. But I knew that it was a commission. I had to kind of give the draft so that I can get a check, So I submitted it and said, maybe you should read it and give me comments, etc. And then I had to fly to Singapore to see my mom. I'm originally from Singapore. So, I've forgotten all about this draft, etc. Then I was sleeping in my childhood, home, in my room. And one morning I woke up and on the shelf was Pride and Prejudice. And thinking, oh my God, I know exactly how to adapt this story now. Because Pride and Prejudice is about two women who, are trying to get married, but really trying to empower themselves to get what they want. And this is what the two women are about. They want to go to war and fight on behalf of their country. They want to lead a group of men to do so. And guess what? The men don't allow them to do so. All right? So that's my story. So it goes beyond Pride and Prejudice to show how these two smart and capable women had to surmount the patriarchy to get to where they want to get to. So next slide. So they trained, they had to battle, all these guys. Next slide. There is also, of course, the love story, because I love a love story. Next slide. But of course, you also fight with your lovers. Next slide. Yeah, and so one difference between this and, say, a romantic comedy is that this takes place during wartime. And so the very existence of their country, the very existence of their land is in question. So it's a very urgent thing. And what they need to do is to use all their resources, men, women, everything, to fight the enemy. And so, next slide. Yeah, so even though they get married, this is not the end of the play. This is where, I guess, Pride and Prejudice would end. Next slide. Okay, so you think, oh, this is the end of the play. No, they actually go to war. And there's a sequence of them kind of going through fighting and everything. The good thing is that they won, History shows us that. I'm not inventing the ending. So I guess, that is really how this thing came about and my process of writing it. But I just want to leave you with 3 thoughts. One is, even though I had a hard time finding many female characters in that Chinese classics, when I actually Google Chinese women warriors, there were tons. On Google, there were so many. I'm like, gosh, all these stories waiting to be told. But not only that, think about it. Most historians, most people who record histories, write about stories are men. So think of the many, many other stories that have been forgotten, So I feel that it's so important to write this kind of story. Second of all, yes, even though this is kind of like, it's set 2,000 years ago, whatever, but the characters live on because they are in a video game, And the video game is not ended. There could be further iterations. So these characters might evolve, and they may become superhero one day. I don't, you know. And finally, I just want to leave you with this thought. As I mentioned before, you know, I put a lot of different things into a play. Like for the other play, The Empress Nightingale, I had animals, I had puppets, I had a mime show, I had Pai Chi, which is a 17-syllable kind of poem from, it's time appropriate for that era, and I want to put it in. I also had people singing in Mandarin, even though they're Asians and not of Chinese descent. So be fearless, put in whatever you feel that is necessary to tell your story, because who knows, if they believe in your vision, they will tell your story. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the inspirations. I would like to invite all of you now to come up to the stage. So I thought there was so much that came up in their individual presentations. And I'm very interested as a theater academic in this idea of decolonization, right? And I think so much of our work in the theater strives towards social justice and social change. And you guys talk about being fearless. You talk about bringing up stories that are not often heard. And so my first question that I want to open to you guys is, in what ways can theater adaptation be used as a means to reclaim power, to restructure this post-colonial, post-imperial landscape that we are in?
I can start. I think for me, it was for myself of claiming Shakespeare, which, I mean, England is one of the biggest colonizers that we have known, and thinking about how the work of Shakespeare is often viewed as audiences say, this is not how you're supposed to do it. Where are the puffy shirts? Where are the people with the, like the big tall boots? And why are you putting black and brown people in these shows? And why are you changing what it is? And it's like, Shakespeare's been dead for a very long time. And the whole idea of how it started was to bring people together to have a good time. And so I think it was like, okay, once I felt I had the permission to be able to do it, like, we're gonna do it, and we're gonna do it in a way that feels empowering for us as storytellers and for us as a community.
Yeah. And to invite others into the story and to say that this belongs to all of us.
100%.
I mentioned the Empress Nightingale. What I didn't say was the background to why I was commissioned to write that. So in 2012, there was another adaptation of The Nightingale done by La Jolla Playhouse. And they also set it in ancient China. But what they did was, when it came to casting, they said, oh, we'll just do colorblind casting. And so, even though it was a play written for hopefully Asian American performers, at the end of the day, there were only like 1 or 2 roles available to them. There was a big hoo-ha. You can Google the background and the story of that. And so, as a response to that, this theater company in DC, Adventure Theater Company, which is a TYA company, felt the need to do another adaptation of The Nightingale, but also set in China, but then to have an all Asian cast. So it was competitive. I had to submit different things, and they interviewed me, and I think ultimately why they found, I guess, my pitch interesting was because I did a lot of research. I found parallels between the story and the time that I want to set it in And the nightingale, I even researched, are there even nightingales in China? You know, can we even tell that story? Is it just, you know, not true? Well, I found that there actually, you know, nightingales do exist in China, but only in Western China. And that's even better. You know why? Because, you know, emperors who are vain, they would want rare things. They would ask their, whatever, slaves, you know, to go and grab those, rare objects from far and bringing them to the palace. And that feeds into the story. So there's a lot of history, a lot of power structure, a lot of stuff that was similar that I could latch on to write this adaptation.
I suppose, as I said yesterday, you know, that for me very often is not so much about the theatre, but the life outside the theatre that I'm interested in. And so in that particular project that I discussed, Salome, it was important for me to think about the process of Michaela, and it changed fundamentally the whole work because of Michaela's positionality and their process. So I found that I became a kind of therapist with them, but through the work, you know, through this constant rehearsal process. And it was also a case of, as I said, that the question of developing agency is it's vital for the theatre to take a step back, because it's not about the product, but it's the process of what the individuals are going through. And of course, I myself also learned a lot from being in that project, and in particular, kind of just constantly questioning what are we doing with theatre actually, you know, because we say we are doing something, but we very often are not. And I think that there is a need for us to actually destroy the parameters of theatre, because it is not necessarily the be-all and end-all of what we are setting out to do.
There's something really powerful in that statement, this idea of destroying the parameters, because it has to do with also the idea of ownership, right? Who has ownership over these stories? And is it helpful for us to think about who the owners are, right? If we talk about the canon, we talk about the Western, what's in the Western canon, right? The stories of the Greeks and the story of Shakespeare versus the Eastern canon. We talk about Romance of the Three Kingdoms or Peony Pavilion. Is it helpful for us to put the canons against each other? And so next I want to ask, how do we redistribute the ownership of the narratives that tear down those power structures that we find ourselves in?
I'll have a go. I kind of thought about that, and I think it's a very difficult question to answer. For example, the adaptation of the Hans Christian Andersen story. It's originally Danish, but it's set in China. I'm a Singaporean, so does it make it a Danish story? Is it a Chinese story? Is it a Singaporean story? Or is it a mixture of all three? I think ultimately it's how it lands with the audience, I feel. So if you go and talk to the audience member who has seen this play, what kind of story would they say it is? You know, they may not even know who Hans Christian Andersen is, right? They may not know anything about Chinese history. They may not know that the playwright was originally from Singapore, but how do they perceive the story? And maybe they don't even perceive it as from where, you know, they just perceive it as a story about, you know, an emperor who becomes it's a story of coming to age, understanding, wisdom, and maybe that's enough, you know, for what that play is trying to do, you know.
This is a complex question. This is a very complex question, because I do have a belief that not everybody gets to tell all these stories, and partially it is because in like Western Europe has had, especially in the U.S., has had such a strong hold on culture and dominating culture that I'm happy to say, like, y'all can't tell some stories. Y'all can step back and let people who have not been able to be in those positions be the holders of storytelling. And at the same time, again, I don't own Shakespeare. Nobody owns Shakespeare. But like, if anyone wants to do Shakespeare, go for it. Mess it up, do whatever you want with it. Again, it's free. And I think that's why, one of the things why it is, it's free, but it's also like, there's really good structure in it. It's a very helpful structure, and it's a very good playground to learn and to mess around and to bring your own viewpoint to.
I think that there's always quite a lot of different worlds that come together in a theatre experience, right? There's the world on stage, and there is also the world backstage, and there's the world with the audience. So we're all world making on many different levels when we make a work of theatre. So I think for me, I've become more distant from this, or maybe I've taken a more aerial view towards ownership, because in 1997 when I did Lear, we had geopolitics in the rehearsal room, who is speaking more? Why is this person speaking more? Is it because they are coming from a country that's funding the project? And this kind of geopolitics was driving me crazy, because it was really like, but in the end, it has to really be an organic process. But if you start off by policing the room, what does it actually move towards? What kind of world are we making? So this idea of policing a situation is one way of making a world, I think, but at the same time, is this the way in which ownership should finally develop? Shouldn't ownership begin from people reclaiming out of an urgency for themselves, rather than a policeman or policewoman saying, no, now is your turn to speak. Okay, let's divert the traffic now. And I found this kind of geopolitical discussion very important at a certain point, but at a final place, I think that it starts to get in the way of actually, people developing their own authorities and their own positions. So now I feel like as I make work, I think that the only person I have to police is myself, actually, because I feel like, of course, we are the ones, especially when we initiate projects as writers, authors, or different facilitators coming together. We hold the reins of power, and so we have to self-critique that, and we have to actually decolonize ourselves firstly, and I think I tend to go with the flow now, and not stress too much about who is policing who, but to try to well, one strategy is to find multiplicities. So this is one of the reasons why post-pandemic I felt I couldn't tell the story in one way. I had to tell the story through film and through theatre, but as two parallel tracks, not like assigning like, okay, scene 1 goes to film, scene 2 goes to theatre, scene 3 back to film, but it's really that there are two lives, or 3 or 4 parallel strands all going at the same time. And in a way that then through that multiplicity, we actually decolonize also the kind of geopolitics of the genre, right? Because you also have a kind of the fact that which always happens in theatre, that theatre colonizes writing, theatre colonizes visual art, theatre colonizes video. Everything is told from the vantage point of theatre. So I think that that's also something to be conscious about, that we have to allow the genres to really be in a multiple space.
I really like when you speak of this idea of multiplicity. I think for too long we have understood narrative storytelling in a very specific, phallogocentric understanding of what we expect, how we expect the story to go. We expect rising action, climax, and denouement. But there are other ways that narratives can be in this sort of parallel ways or multiple ways. It's interesting you talk about this idea of policing. I'm curious, what are some trip hazards, right? In us doing this decolonizing work, what are some things that we should look out for? questions of plurality or authenticity or ideas of appropriation, and what are some instances where you've encountered those things?
Okay, I'll try it with a thought. We just spoke about form, right? Multiplicity of form. And I think the form itself can be decolonized. And that's why when I try to write a play, I mean, the play is still, there are different forms that are equivalent in different culture, but we're still talking about an English language play for an American audience. So there's an expectation of certain things, right? But just as what you just said, can we play around with that? So, I mentioned before, in my plays, I try to introduce other forms that will butt up against the actual form itself. So there's like puppetry, which is, Chinese puppetry. There's, in the Empress Nightingale, there's a lot of stuff. I mean, there's xiangsheng, which is crosstalk. There's pai shi, I mentioned, which is a kind of Chinese poetry. And so all this will challenge the form itself to show that, oh, you know what? Maybe there's another way of perceiving the story, for example.
I think one of the things that I was thinking about a lot with Comedy of Errors is there's a lot of very clever text in there between Antipholus. There's two sets of twins, and they're both, there's two, both named Antipholus. They got separated at birth. Two named Dromio. They got separated at birth. And Dromio in the initial one is a slave, and Antipholus is the master. And there was a shipwreck. They both got separated. Two ended up in Ephesus, two ended up in Syracuse looking for their lost twins. And the one thing was, okay, we're not going to do slave and master, as I said before, but we did have to show status because that is an important part of the story. And so we thought of like Dromio is, okay, so Dromio is the worker. Dromio is someone that is someone who's doing the heavy work. It's like, and when we did an edit, we did a really clean edit, and we got down to like a 60-minute edit of Comedy of Errors so we can build some songs out. But then we did a reading with actors, and they said, oh, so Dromio, who is has a lot of clever text, his text is gone, and now all he does is go and get things. But, oh, okay. Well, that feels like an overcorrection because we're not giving working people an opportunity to see themselves reflected. So I went back and was like, okay, let me go back and let me see what text it is. It's not totally offensive to me, and put back in. And then the other thing that we did is we gave him a song. We gave Dromio of Syracuse a specific song to give him the inner world of what is it like to be a stranger in a city where everyone condemns you, but they don't know who you are. And of just the hazards of that. And it's like we have 2 ballads that we allowed, and that was one of them, to give a really introspective space to a character so that he has more space. And I think that was one of our trip hazards, is like, who do we want to reflect? Who do we want to see themselves reflected on the stage?
I think this idea of going back to ownership, for me, it's never really a question of who it belongs to, because very often I cast or I make the work around those individuals who come from that crisis of sexuality, or that they have been born into the art form, and in a sense they are actually colonized by the art form because they have to learn the art form from childhood. And so it's really about, it already belongs to them. But the question that I'm more concerned about in working and collaborating with them is how I should stop taking away their ownership, because they already have ownership. But very often, in the way theater happens, you take away people's ownership on stage, and that's a very strong thing that I was coming into theater in the 90s, where there was a constant discussion of the politics of the director. right? The director was the colonizer, and in that situation, how do you redistribute power? But not in a kind of again, not in a kind of policing way, but just having certain kind of reflexivity to know that you are actually taking away the ownership when you do certain things, and if you've already cast it in a very specific way, and in that sense, it also is a kind of a destruction of theatre, because I actually do work very strongly with biography, you know, even though it's actually sometimes very taboo to do that. But I work with biography because I feel like this is actually one of the lodestones of ownership. And in a kind of a theatrical situation, we're supposed to actually be neutral. We're not our biographies, but when we challenge that, we get into a kind of position where theatre becomes confused, rather than that this is all make believe. But there is some complexity of the world, because we are in a place where we're having several worlds coming together, including the world that we are making in the rehearsal room and the world on stage. And I must say that for me, it's still quite central for me, the world between the performers, because I feel like this is actually the first thing that I am encountering. That's the most direct moment for me as a director with the people that I'm working with. And it's almost like right now, like in Germany, there's been a whole kind of destruction of institutions, because these institutions are talking about freedom, about democracy in the theatre, but in the place that they do, but actually the whole situation backstage is completely hierarchical, right? The way the artistic director runs the company, the way men are dominating women in the staff room, you know, it's atrocious actually. But so this idea of trying to actually look at theatre by, in a way, decolonizing the world that we are making in a rehearsal room is vital, I think.
Wonderfully said. Thank you so much. I want to open up the floor to the for questions. We have time for one question. Yes.
Hi, so I love this panel, the discussions, everything that it's brought out. It's been very insightful. I had a question specifically for King Sen, since you adapted an Oscar Wilde work. What are your thoughts on other adaptations where, rather than queering them, they're de-queering them, such as Netflix's adaptation of The Picture of Dorian Gray, where they're changing the relationship between Dorian and Basil from this queer romantic one to them being brothers?
I take a very wide definition of queering, in a sense that what Judith Butler says, that queering has to be different at different times. And it's queering is not just sexuality, but I think that all of what we've talked about, all of our work actually is a queering. It's a queering of comedy of errors, the way that Rebecca has done it. There's a queering of Romance of the Three Kingdoms by taking a very specific position of these two sisters who were minor, one-liner characters in the book. So it's queering for some kind of purpose, and as Sarah Ahmad also talks about unhappiness. You know, she says that I want to focus on unhappiness because it makes room, it makes space. It makes space for us to rethink our lives rather than to accept the hierarchies which are already existing. So in that sense, I think queering is really a way in which we reinvent to address some of these basic issues and how we make space. So therefore, so this very broad idea of queering. So you know, in a way, it's terrible to talk to me about queer anything, because I'm so open. I just feel like we are all queering the works which were classically given to us.
I think we need to close out there. I'm sorry.
I think this was an incredibly profound and fruitful conversation that we had about decolonizing. I so admire all of your work and what you're contributing to our theatre audiences and to the wider discourse. A round of applause for our beautiful